Welcome, welcome to Product Week, an event designed to help you level up your PM skills and career. This event is powered up by ADP List, the biggest peer-to-peer learning platform in the world. If you want to learn, get mentored from the best tech talent in the world, discuss ideas and network, ADP List is the perfect match for you. We are 100% free. For Product Week, we are giving away an Apple Watch, kindly sponsored by Product Academy. All you have to do is share what you have learned from our sessions on LinkedIn and Twitter. Tag the speakers and ADP List. Details will be shared in the chat section. Now, for us to run this session smoothly, a few housekeeping rules. Please keep your cameras on at all moments of this call. Please use your real name on Zoom and Slido. Presentation will be the panel actually will be 30 minutes and will be followed up by a 15-minute Q&A. For the Q&A, we will be using Slide to manage questions. Scan the QR code behind me or click the link in the chat where you can ask all of your burning questions. Please remember to send your questions with your name, since anonymous questions will not be considered. You also can upvote each other's questions on Slido. The session will be recorded and we will share the recording as soon as it is available. Now, let me present to you the amazing panel that we have today. We have Kanav, Group Product Manager at Box, Richa, Product Strategist and Partner at Parallel HQ, and grad student at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, Juan Antonio, who is Product Manager at FEMSA, Experto, Nandita, who is Accessibility Product Manager at Microsoft, and Brian, Senior Product Manager at Conversational AI Digital Assistants at Inuit. Thank you so much, speakers, for joining us today. Antonio will be our moderator for this panel, so I pass it to you, Antonio. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. We have prepared some questions that maybe are the most frequently asked questions that you have about cross-functioning with other roles. So I would like to start this discussion with your experience, Kanav, as a group product manager at Box. And what are your suggestions at work when you are listening to different product manager issues and the challenges that they are facing? What are your common suggestions to them about cross-functioning with the other different teams?
Sure. Hi, folks. I'm a product lead at Box. My experience has typically been in the B2B side of things. I'll talk a bit about that. So I guess maybe few things, right? One is, I guess, the main challenge tends to be around stale information. So I guess one thing to keep in mind is cross-functioning with other teams is all about information exchange, right? How do you make that happen in a way that works for your team, right? Whether it's synchronous, asynchronous. So I think that's something to figure out, is how you can actually get that information flowing. I guess the other thing to keep in mind is your audience, who you're interacting with. PMs typically tend to have more breadth of information, and the other cross-functional teams might have domain knowledge or have more depth in a specific area. So I guess it's sort of good to be mindful of the audience and who you're interacting with. And I'll probably end with keeping context in mind, right? Like, what is it that you're trying to get out of an experience? Are you trying to gain alignment? Are you trying to just disseminate information? Is it a brainstorm solution, right? So essentially, at what stage of the problem area are you at? And that will sort of help you define how you sort of tackle the problems. Lots more, but I'll stop there for now.
All right. I would also like to know the point of view from June and Dita at a big company as Microsoft. What are your common suggestions to other product managers or even tips apply for yourself when you need to cross function with different roles, and that's a little bit tricky. So what are your thoughts on that?
For sure, and thank you, Kunal, for sharing your thoughts. And it's almost like building on top of that for me. I'm an accessibility product manager at Microsoft, and one of the things that is really, really, really important, and Kanav kind of touched on this, right? Know your audience. But I would kind of build on that and go a step further and say, even empathize with them and understand their needs, because we all want the same thing, right? We all want to make sure we have the best kick-ass product and we're all doing what we can do. But to get there, we all function in different ways. So even when you think about the space of accessibility and working with different people and working with people with disabilities, it's all about just understanding what each other's needs are. It's very simple. Certain people function a certain way. Like, I'm a very on the go impromptu person. You throw something at me, it's not going to faze me. Some people prefer more preparation. Some people are like, hey, I like structure. So when you're working with different people, whether it's your designers, whether it's other PMs, whether it's even other teams, that's something to understand, especially with people you work very often with. Just go ahead and ask them question. What can I do that empowers you to be the best version of you? And what is something that I want to make sure I don't do that is going to stop you from showing up authentically? And if you just start with these questions, I think that really teases out a lot. And it also creates that safe space. And if you want to go a step further, oh my gosh, be vulnerable and share that. That's something, I just transitioned teams, and as I was getting to know my own team, I led with that. I was like, hey, I just want to share something with you. I don't do well in meetings when I'm hungry. I can't pay attention. And if I'm hungry, I'm thinking about my lunch, I will not be listening to you. So I don't want to do that. So whenever we schedule meetings, let's make sure it's not between XYZ times. And kind of throw that back at them to say, what works best for you? How can I function well with you? How do I collaborate well with you? So just be vulnerable, create that safe space. And as you're working well with people, be respectful of that. And I'll pass it back to you, Antonio, for the next person.
Sure, and I think that's something hard, because you need to have also empathy with the stakeholders and with all the members of the team. And something that I would like to get deeper with you, Brian, it's how do you manage priority among the different teams to get a common understanding on it? I mean, what's the most important, and how do you say no? I mean, what have you learned with this long way until you have become senior product manager into it?
Yeah, thanks, Antonio. And I'll just continue to add on. So I think Nandita, you brought up some good points about layering in empathy, and the culture at Intuit is all about understanding your customer problem. So kind of we have this process company-wide that you're trained on called Design for Delight, and you can actually find it online. It's external if you want to start to pull that into your practice. But essentially, it's really putting yourself in the customer's shoes and completing follow me homes. And so you basically kind of put yourself as a fly on the wall, and you say, hey, Nandita, you use my product and I'd love to see how you use it today. And you see how they're interacting with it, and you see what problems and challenges are coming up. And you use those in what we call Design for Delight, which is basically, human-centered design principles. And in those sessions, you're bringing in all of your key partners from design. You could bring in call center reps. You can bring in people that are users of your platform. And you start to uncover, what is the customer problem statement that then goes into ideation. And we're all about experimentation, throwing things out there, even if it's a button that customers click on and behind it, it says, hey, thanks for clicking this button. There's nothing here, but we appreciate you interacting with us, right? A lot of companies are, they want to deliver on an MVP, right? Not a lot of companies want to experiment and try new things. And so what's cool at Intuit is empathy is huge. And I think cross collaboration, with teams, and the platform that I support is our digital assistant platform that powers all our chatbots across TurboTax and QuickBooks and Mint, Credit Karma, all of these different companies, right? All these different business units that have different goals, different objectives. And so how do you start to scale your platform to meet the needs of multiple users, right? And if we start to look at externalizing this platform as well for small business owners, how do we start to create a reusable platform there? And it really starts with empathy and understanding what they actually need.
Sure. And something that it's also difficult is to push the strategy, and that's could be kind of frustrating because sometimes teams forget about the strategy. They just want to get to a meeting and start ideating stuff, and they forget that something was already planned. They forget that we have to get to certain goal, and we need to deliver certain features in certain order. And I would like to know your opinion, Richa, about this, since you are more closely related to strategy. And how do you deal with that with different teams? I mean, there must be a different way to deal with priority and strategy and say no to designers, to business people, to developers, and so on. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you for that question, and great point so far by Kanav, Nandita, and Brian on how do you collaborate with people. I think like I'll bank on like two of my experiences from the past. One was with this company called Atlin, where I was working as a resident entrepreneur, working on multiple collaborative products across different teams, as well as my last role at Parallel, where I was a lead product strategist and a partner. And I think like there are two things that one needs to keep in mind is that first, like you need to bring the context to everybody, which is to say that like transfer that context as much as possible in meetings. So if you're starting a meeting, don't start by your ask, start by setting context into why this is important for this particular product or why this is important for this particular project that we're working on, and give that like high level 30,000 feet context so that people know that why are we doing this thing, or why are we even taking this decision, or why are we even meeting today in this room, right? Because everybody's so busy in their own schedules, it's hard to figure out why am I in this Zoom call, and it's almost like a robotic action now to click on the next meeting, go on the next meeting after that. And so kind of like bringing people back to that state and giving that context is super, super critical. And the second thing that I would say is that it's also important to disagree and commit. So like as a strategist, not every time you'll be right. Like, kind of mentioned that you have a lot of breadth of knowledge. And when you're meeting stakeholders from say engineering, design, they have a lot of depth of knowledge. And so when you come up with an idea and you go to a meeting where you have engineers and designers, when they come up with their perspective, sometimes you'll be taken aback and you might not agree with your own idea that you came up with. And in that case, like it's great to just disagree and commit to saying, oh yeah, what you're saying is great, and let's go with that, let's run with that, rather than pushing forward for your idea. And in times when I've done that, I've often learned that has been extremely useful, because your end goal is to make your product better or make your customer happier. And so whatever makes that at the end of the day wins. And so those are like the two strategies I would share.
Good, awesome.
Can I?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
Can I quickly just add something that, Rich, I think that's a great point, right? In terms of strategy and how it plays in, I just want to share how we sort of do things at Box. So we have this process called a P-Strat, or a product strategy session, where an individual team actually presents to execs and to the CEO on a specific area, right? And this is, I guess, a great way for different teams to come together. We've got designers, engineers, product, analysts, everybody sort of involved in sort of creating a pitch. You might have like a mock-up of what the experience might look like. But I think at the end of the day, what it does, it helps get this alignment. Essentially, we've sort of created some vision of what we want to do. We sort of get buy-in with execs. And at the same time, we might decide what we don't want to do, right? Like, which is we are going down this path, and we are explicitly deciding not to go down another path. So I think getting that upfront buy-in is really crucial. But of course, like as you sort of go down the execution path, there, you can definitely get derailed. But just wanted to quickly add that. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think something that has worked to me, it's having shared spaces. We work with Miro, and that Miro, we have the roadmap, we have the team structure, sometimes a table that explains the different areas that we have, so we could know who's working on which part and why they defend certain stuff in the product. And also saying no, it's difficult. I don't know if you have mastered that art, because sometimes we have some stakeholders that use authority to push features and move them towards a different goal because they have that intuition or something, and they forget about the strategy, the roadmap. They just want to beat some goal, but they forget about the context and the strategic thinking instead of the tactical thinking. What other suggestions or tips do you have when you need to really say no to a stakeholder and maybe the scenario is not the best?
Yeah, I mean, I can add some thoughts and others can go as well. I guess for me, I guess the way to say no is to explain why you're saying no. That's one aspect, and the other is to sort of provide some sort of alternative, right? So in terms of why you're saying no, you might point back to your strategy, right? This is what we decided 3 months ago. And if we want to achieve the goals that we set out to do, there's certain things that we cannot do, right? So I guess tying it back to some previous decision or some strategy that everyone has agreed to earlier can then help later on in sort of justifying and saying no, right? And another aspect in saying no could be just sort of digging deeper as to what somebody actually wants, what problem they're trying to solve, maybe their alternatives in which how you can achieve something similar, right? So I think just digging deeper and trying to figure out why somebody wants something, maybe their short-term workarounds that can be that you can use. Not always the case, but I think at least it's good to provide your feedback, and I guess at the end of the day, empathize with whoever's asking you for that. But yeah, anybody else want to share something?
Yeah, and I'll just add to that very quickly. So I'm a big believer of design sprints, where you can test an idea and come up with a prototype and just take it to a few customers and see whether that works or not in a matter of 5 days. And with that, the one thing that I learned, like what really works for the process of like making this happen is actually just going and collecting some data around your potential solution and seeing whether it works or not. So whenever somebody is really hell-bent upon not listening in or agreeing to, what people will definitely agree to is getting some more data in. So one way you can do is just like ask people to get some more data in on your product, whether it's through qualitative research, like done through user tests or through product metrics. And when you speak on data, it's highly logical. There are no emotions and egos involved. And so it's easier to say no on the basis of data and insights.
Yeah, because sometimes they see you as the devil, right? Here comes the PM, and he or she always says no. And I think there's always two kind of people: the ones, and sometimes there are a lot on the UX teams that say no, you cannot touch the product, you cannot do this. But we have, on the other hand, different people that say maybe if we move a little bit of this and another bit of this other thing, we can develop this in a very early stage, or maybe it could be an ugly feature, but that could lead us to get some data, learn from people, and that's it. And you need to balance the opinions, the ones that say no, you cannot touch the product until we do the proper research and get the insights and etc. until 2 sprints, and the other ones that say, hey, come on, let's just get something early just to learn a little bit about the customers. What do you think about that? maybe Brian, Nandita, you have
I think that's a good point, Antonio. Some stuff that I also struggle with at times, and it's kind of the boring side of being a PM, I guess, is like you have your own strategy, you have your own product, but you do have to influence other product managers that might own a different part of a product that hooks into yours, right? And how does that align with their goals? And at Intuit, we're really agile, and within quarterly planning, we basically map out all the work, and teams have to commit. And sometimes you have to have those hard conversations where you say, Richa, hey, your team is dependent, but if y'all don't have scope, what's higher priority? What are you scoping for your team capacity that's higher priority? And you have those conversations, and maybe you reduce her team scope for that quarter, just so you can get to like 80% of your goal, right? How can we still move this down the line without your team being a blocker and impacting? So I think, the tough conversations aren't just with a designer and aren't just with your own tech teams, but they can also be with other PMs that you're dependent on their teams helping, deliver something that your team is a prerequisite for.
I love that. And Brian said it so beautifully. So I'm just going to add on one more point to that. I would say even being able to articulate your user impact goes a long way. So when you're talking about these priorities and sharing that, I think it also helps to be able to put it in ways to say, hey, here's a change, or here are some changes that are going to have higher impact. And so you are actually part of creating this impact for your user. So even bring them into the conversation. When we think about design thinking, to even take a step further to think of co-designing, and instead of making them feel like someone's on the outside, bring them into the conversation to say, hey, here's what you can do to actually create impact. We can do this together. We're a team. We can't do everything. So let's prioritize and let's figure this out, because we can either do 10 things or we can actually do 5 things really well. So let's kind of align on those 5 things, and let's make sure those are the most impactful and just bring them together. So just kind of taking that step further. And again, Brian said it very beautifully. So I will leave it at that.
I can add to that too. Like, I feel like the collaboration piece is key as well, right? Like, I've worked with PMs that have an idea and they want to get the credit, right? They want the credit for the idea that they have come up with. And so they kind of hold it to themselves and get it to a place. And then they try to, get buy-in, and everybody is like, it's great that you came up with this idea. So if you bring in partners early on, I think that really helps. And it also gets, the diverse perspective there of things that you may not have considered. So I think collaboration is really key there.
I love that. Yeah, I think the one quote, and again, I'm a user researcher at heart. So you see accessibility product manager, don't get swayed by that one. I'm a UX researcher at heart. And so for me, like, one thing I always just like is a mantra for me: feedback is a gift. Take it. Don't get defensive with it. Just take it. It's going to make it better. Very easy to get defensive with it in UX, but it's a gift. So.
Yeah, I think Brian's point actually, just quickly, I think Brian's point resonated with me as well. I think I have a similar challenge, and totally agree with what was discussed. I think just one thing to add on is sometimes what I've done is actually gotten along other PMs into customer conversations as well. And that way, I guess you are not telling them, hey, this is a problem we found, how do we fix it? But they are part of the journey, right? And sometimes just being or just hearing the problem straight from the customer is sort of empowering in a way, and you're then part of discovering what the solution should be, rather than being told, here is a solution, can you help?
Yeah. And
sure.
Sorry, I was just saying that I'll second kind of I've also like sometimes gone back and gotten like engineers to come to field trips or to work with the customer directly, and that just shortens the entire process by months, if not more. So yeah.
Let's move to the next question that we have, and this is something that they don't really teach you in boot camps, courses, and sometimes books don't even mention that, but you can learn a lot about roadmaps, about facilitation, a lot about product strategy. But if you get into a team that it's not prepared, that the organizational maturity is not the best fit for applying certain methods or artifacts, you could have a really hard time leading or even discussing with the different teams. Do you have a suggestion on how to read these scenarios, how to assess teams in order to get a better approach for those scenarios?
Yeah, I can share a little bit here. Like the space I work in is conversational AI, which is very, very new. And I would say the field itself is not mature, right? IVRs have been around for several years, but probably, multiple years, but chatbots have quickly become this hype cycle. And I think, at least in my previous role and the role I'm in now, like, the organization is very dispersed and we work with teams cross-functionally, and it's not the traditional model where you would have this diverse group of people working together towards a single platform. And so I've been in roles where I don't have any designers dedicated to me, and you have to and tech teams too, right? Like you're influencing other people to drive what you're trying to get accomplished, and it just makes your job so much harder. But you have to be able to sell the idea, and you have to be able to show, it goes back to like, what's the customer problem statement, and how do you start to lay out work and a plan and present that to the right leaders to get buy-in. And if you break down the work where they can see that, it just helps you move so much more faster in setting expectations and priorities, and that's how the resources start to come into play. You have to lay out the vision a little clearer.
Sure. And do you have, or maybe you have seen these different challenges as a group product manager with your product managers? Maybe they are assigned to different products or different part of it. Do you see different levels of teams maturity, and do you suggest different approaches to those scenarios?
Yeah, I think it's definitely maybe a function of let's say whether you're sort of B2C or B2B, as well as what stage you're at. Like if you're sort of an early stage startup, or you have sort of achieved product market fit and you're not just expanding and you have no idea what's going on, or you're sort of a mature company, right? And I think it's probably the middle stage where things are undecided and they're changing that tends to become problematic. Startups typically have sort of very little processes, and they're just a few people involved, so just easy to get buy-in. And larger companies have processes in place. So I think in the middle ground, essentially, I guess what you would typically need to do is figure out who your core audience is, right? Who is actually affected by a particular decision, who should be involved. And the second stage is who are the people who just need to be informed, right? So sort of active participation versus just passively knowing about a decision. And then just figuring out what works for you, right? Sometimes it could be just formalizing on communication mechanisms, right? If a decision was made, what alias do you want to send out the comms to, right? So I think those are the sort of things that you sort of need to formalize and figure out what works for you, right? And I guess there are aspects of, let's say, within product engineering design, I think those may be easier to solve. I think the challenges start getting when you have more stakeholders involved, right? So if you've got marketing involved, you've got analytics, you've got your growth teams, research teams, finance, legal, it just grows on and on, right? So I guess the more stakeholders you have, the better it is to have some sort of formal communication mechanism. So that's sort of the only learning that I have is whatever decision happened, just make a log of it, write it down somewhere, because 2 months later, you won't remember why something happened or who made it. Just have a written log somewhere and you can just sort of refer to that.
Totally. And what about you, Richa, after leading product management? Do you see like different kind of suggestions, or what has been your approach to these different scenarios? Do you read the team at the beginning? Do you try to assess the product phase that they are on? What's been your approach or your strategy to face this challenge?
Yeah, so I've mostly worked in a startup environment, so I'm going to speak to that because I've worked in teams that are either 100 people or less. So, very highly agile teams. But I think that stands true for even larger organizations is that at the end of the day, everybody is a human, right? And everybody who collaborates come down to if people know each other better, if they are in some tandem, they would just like collaborate better. So the one thing that has worked for me is leading any project or any team in any way. Start with like some sort of like building that human bond, getting people together, getting them to know each other just beyond their everyday work life. And that kind of like, I mean, typically we offboard that work to say people ops and HR, but I kind of take that on and try and like bring people together so that we know each other better at a more human level. There is this newsletter by First Round called First Round Review. In that, in one of their published newsletter, what they mentioned was create a guide to yourself. So I've also used this, that I've asked people to create a guide about themselves. When do you work? When do you not work? What's upcoming for you? What are your preferences? And just having that information about everybody makes it easier to collaborate in general. And then if there was a situation where teams had a really hard time collaborating because deadlines were coming and going, and people were missing their marks and things like that, and everybody was getting frustrated and blame games start to happen, right? In those situations, I think like just having open, candid conversations about what's happening and why is it happening and how we can improve it, rather than really sitting down and blaming each other, works out very well. And I mean, if you guys have read about or heard about this book called Radical Candor, like you want to kind of like apply that framework to your team in a way that people are candid enough, but not like obnoxious assholes to each other. And so having that balance is important, but like giving people that freedom of like speaking up and talking to each other and sorting those issues is super useful. So I try to approach it from that angle most of the times when a team dynamics is up, whether it's between people within my team versus people across multiple teams. It kind of works.
Sure. And what's the scenario, Nandita, at Microsoft that maybe could be different, since Microsoft was, I believe, one of the first companies that introduced product management, and they called it program management. Maybe the product mindset is more mature in the whole organization, maybe not. How do you deal with that? Or maybe in your career, maybe you had different experiences.
Just to be specific, do you want me to touch on strategy or the product phase, or is there anything else you want me to specifically touch
on? How have you faced your work on product management when the organizational maturity could be not the best, or maybe if it's if the organization have a strong product mindset, do you still have those challenges to introduce the product management work, or it's everything super fluid and they know what to expect from a product manager? They ask for you in the meetings and they look at you to take the decisions, because that doesn't happen in some companies, maybe when product manager is still introduced. Yeah.
Thank you for elaborating on that. I appreciate it. Again, I feel like I'm blessed and I'm thankful that in many ways it has been very well defined for me. So in terms of expectations, that has definitely been helpful. I will say it changes from team to team. It changes from role to role. So even when you think of Microsoft as being such a big company and oh my gosh, I'm still wrapping my head around how huge it can be. Because when you're working with global partners across different time zones, across different teams, across different functions, it changes. I've had different roles in Microsoft where my role as a product manager looked very different on, let's say, an internal product in B2B versus now being in a different open source product, which is B2D, business to developer. Accessibility Insights is free. You can go download it, it's open source. Very different experience. So your users are different, your customers are different. So your product management functionality or roles also changes. I get to put on my user researcher hat a lot often as well, where, you know, there are some days when I'm doing user interviews. There are some days when I'm looking at data, looking at what that's looking like. There are some days when I'm working with other teams and we're working on strategy. It changes. It really changes. I will say again, I'm very blessed, at least in the org I am in, the organization I'm in, where it has been fairly well defined. So I understand my expectations. I understand who I'm working with. We work with some absolutely fabulous designers. I love my development team. I mean, gosh, that's where the magic happens, you know, because everyone has different pieces of information that you need to come together. And so that's been one of the things, I think, again, recognizing that as a PM, you're almost like the orchestrator when you're thinking about making music. You're not going and playing each and every piece, and that's okay. But you just have to know which note to play and who to pull for. So I hope that answered your question. If you need me to.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for sharing. And we still have some questions, but we would like to hear what are you asking in the chat. So Helen or the team, could you share some questions?
Absolutely. Thank you all for sharing so much. Many insights so far. So the first question we have is from Matt. He asks, communication with engineers seems to be critical to the cross-functional capacity. What are your tips for communicating with engineers in their preferred modes? Who would like to take that first?
All right, I can go. So I'm actually an engineer turned product manager. Yeah, it's definitely important. Like your engineers are the folks that are building your products. I guess personally for me, one tip is if you have a technical background, sometimes it's better to sort of leave your biases behind you. You shouldn't sort of prescribe how a certain piece of technology should be built. Right, that's essentially the job of the engineers. Right, your job is essentially to focus on why this is important, why we are building it, what the customer impact is, and the better job that you can do at this is just going to be helpful to you, right? Because as an engineer, you typically just don't have that level of context as to how, unless you're maybe working on dev-focused product, you don't know how your products are actually being used and how a user perceives it. So I think just providing that that level of insight is just super helpful to engineers, right? Like it just makes things clearer to them. I think that's definitely one thing that I'll share. I have a couple of other things, but I'll let others in the panel also jump in.
This is Nandita, just jumping in real quick. Kind of loved your thought on that. I'm also an engineer turned UX researcher turned product manager. One thing that has been really humbling for me to understand, and again, even though I have an engineering background, I am not in that space where I am coding day in, day out. And oh my gosh, like I have a lot of respect for them who do. Like it's amazing. They make the magic happen. I think one thing I've found is almost building allies. Richa mentioned building trust and, kind of getting social and understanding the team and really taking that thought when you're thinking about these cross-functional capacity and communicating. As a PM, I think one of the things I did, especially when you're joining a new team, or even if you're transitioning or just wanting to get to know people, schedule a quick 15-minute coffee chat. Put some time on the calendar, say, hey, I just want to introduce myself and say hello. and get to know them, get to connect with them. So if you're paired up with someone and you're working with them, it's not like, oh, I don't know you, I don't know who this person is, and it becomes communication easier. And it's okay to say you don't know something, like just be vulnerable. I think that really helps. I've been very honest with my engineers, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm trying to spec this feature out. I have no idea how this works. I can tell you what I needed to do. Can you help me do this? And we'll do this together. And just letting them know that has been helpful. And that's how you're building allies. So next time, even if you run into issues, because everyone runs into issues, but if you ever run into communication issues with anyone, you might have allies on your team that you can then go to and say, hey, how do I approach this? Because you might know one person better than the other, and that's okay. But that's when you can kind of bring more people in to kind of help smoothen waters if needed, and or build a bridge. But build allies in the team. Think of them. Don't think of them as engineers, because I've seen this happen where it's almost like, oh, engineers versus PMs. And I'm like, no. We're on the same team. We care about the same thing. Let's get together and do this. I can't do this without you. You can't do this without me. So.
Yeah, and I'll just add a quick perspective from a non-engineer on the panel. So when I first started to work with engineers, as an excited human being, I would go up to them and it's like, oh, we can do this and we can do that. And I'm pretty sure that would have pissed a lot of people off. One thing that I learned, like a way to work with engineering that became a mantra was, rather than kind of coming up with a solution yourself and like be like, oh, we can do this and we can do that, throw the problem at people. And like people love to be problem solvers. So kind of like leverage that mentality and like throw the problem at people rather than the solution that you might have in your head. And that would A, improve the solution, and B, also like engage engineers on your team. So that's a little add-on from my side.
Okay, if we don't have any other comments, let me go to the next question. I'm gonna follow up with Susan's questions now and come back to this one later, just because it's kind of related to the previous one. So Susan asks, what is your ideal relationship or way of collaboration with designers in the team?
I would like to answer that. Something that you need to learn is that some designers are super emotional about their work, and sometimes when you just get there and start asking for changes, that really hurt their feelings. So something that I learned reading this book from O'Reilly called Discussing Design, it explains that you need to ask some questions before giving feedback. You need to ask the phase of the design process that they are on. You need to ask for the goal they are pursuing. And you also need to say what's working already on the design, because sometimes we just focus on the things that could be improved, and we don't say the things that work well or what is okay in the state that they already have it. So you could use this sandwich technique where you say something good about the design, something that is really working about it, then some of the opportunity areas that the design have, and also closing with what could be better in order to achieve the goal, what other stuff they could try. And well, that's my suggestion.
Yeah, I think I'll add to that. I have one designer that supports my product, and we've since become pretty close. And the work that she takes on, what I've found valuable is coming to her with a question like, how might we do this? And so coming with a question of curiosity almost, and giving her kind of freedom to explore that and build different versions, and then we kind of take those into rapid experimentation with customers and get real-time feedback and iterate from there. But it's really around, you own the product, but bringing in these team members that are probably experts in other pieces of the puzzle that need to come together, and um, being okay to have, people own pieces of this, and you still give your input, and you still comment on the designs, and you still push, and um, in different aspects, but kind of bringing them into strategy sessions in the same way we talked about tech, right? Like bringing them early on. I like to bring my tech team in, really early, and allow them to be part of those strategy conversations, because I've been on teams where they're not. And there's a lot of pushback when you're just giving them work and expecting them to just churn stuff, out the door, and they don't have clear line of sight, and oftentimes you don't know, the limitations of the platform and what they do. So I think the same instance there with design.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that. I think with those two questions, a lot of people got a lot of clarity on relationships with developers and designers. So thank you so much for that. We'll be taking the last question now from Matt. Love design for delight. How do you align best with multiple users and multiple product designers? Sometimes it seems like herding cats, especially if distributed. Who would like to take that one?
I can start here, since design for delight, I think, was something I brought up earlier. So design for delight is basically a bunch of human-centered design practices, and you can find it on intuit.com under I think our job readiness section. And there's a bunch of tools there and things that you can download to pull in, but it's really around understanding deep customer empathy. And so how do we start to bring in customers in, interview them to understand, through observation, where and when are they experiencing pains or problems with our products, and it could be anything within the product, anything within a process, and so it's really gaining that deep customer empathy, and then reviewing those sessions across 5 to 10 customers, no more than that, and no less than that, and that's where you really start to find commonalities across key themes that you're hearing, and then we take that into this concept of going broad to go narrow, and we expand and explore a variety of different solutions. So we go very, very, very broad, and then we take one of those solutions and kind of go narrow, and you test, right, through rapid experimentation, and then you take another idea and you go really, really broad, and then you take it really narrow. So if you bring the right players into those types of conversations, and they're hearing and understanding customer empathy like we described earlier, I think you'll be able to create alignment a little easier in those sessions, and you don't necessarily have to do all of those tools in one session. You can do one that helps, but it's if you're all hearing the same common theme and understand what you're solving for and how that needs to be fixed, I think that would help improve the dispersed disparity across different teams.